Hey, this is Stephen Ament. Welcome to my Exorcism.io series. In the previous episode, we got all the tests passing for the Scrabble exercise from the Ruby track. In this episode, we're going to refactor this code to leave something that's more maintainable than this. So there are a few improvements we can make here. And the first thing I notice off the bat is that we want to take little bits of bare functionality that are strung together in our code, and we want to give it a name. Why do we do that? Well, it's because when I come back in 6 months without all of the context I have in my head right now, or somebody else comes into this class to make a change or to fix a bug or do something in here, we want to be kind to that future developer, right? We want it to take the least amount of work for them to understand what's happening here and know what they need to do. One of the ways that we can do that is by naming things. So I look at this, and what are we doing here? We're calling string with the word we've been passed, and then we're downcasing it. Well, a really common name for this piece of this type of functionality, where you take an input that you've been given and you do something to it to prepare it for everything else that needs to happen, is called normalization. So that's what we've been calling it. So let's normalize word. This can be a private method, because we don't really need it to be a part of the surface area of this class. And then we're just going to move that to there. Test still pass. Okay, normalize word. So what do we do next? Well, I think the most amount of work that we need to do is inside of this score method here. When I look at this, anytime I see an instance where I'm initializing some sort of counter here, and I'm enumerating over an array to add those values up, I step back and I realize that I actually have a method on enumerable that does that. And it's reduce. So instead of each, we want to reduce. And this is not how this works. Let's see. It'll give us a count, and then we're going to we want to return the ongoing count here. Now, so this is going to fail for us. We can call reduce like this, but in these top cases here, we're actually not going to have any elements in our letters array. And so what we need to do is actually give an initialization value of 0. And that way it'll work. So what else can we do here? Well, this is where it helps to look up the documentation for reduce, and let's just do that here. And if we look here at the top, we can see that there are actually 4 different ways that we can call reduce. The block forms that we were just using are actually, those are listed last. But above that, you can see we can call it with a bare symbol, and we can call it with an initial value and a symbol. And so what Ruby is going to do when we hand it a symbol, what reduce will do is it will call a method that matches that symbol name on the current value of memo for each iteration. So let's see what that does. So if we just call it with this form to sum these, to add them together, it should take whatever the current value of the memo is and call the plus method and pass it the current element of the array. So this is going to give us the same result that we had a second ago before we initialized our value, right? Because we have not initialized it, and we have 3 tests here for whom our array is empty. So if we simply initialize it, that gives us what we need. Okay, this is an improvement enough, I think, that I'm going to go ahead and submit this. Okay. So what can we do here for map? I I don't know that it's confusing here to look at it this way, and I don't know how much of an improvement this is. It's a bit of a simplification. But I want to expand on something that we learned regarding that shorthand syntax that some people call the pretzel colon syntax. And the way we saw that before, where we had an array of numbers, and we mapped it, giving the unary ampersand character and then the symbol count. And if you remember what we learned during that episode, it's that in this context, what the unary ampersand does is it converts a block to a proc or a proc to a block. Well, what we saw was that if the object on the right, if the object that you're handing to the unary ampersand is not a block or a proc, what it will do is it will call to proc, assuming that that object responds to toProc. And then whatever that proc is, that's what's gonna get executed. So we saw that expanded to something like this, and instead of a proc, I'm just gonna use a stabby lambda because it's easier to for me to visualize. It gets expanded to something like this, and for symbol, what's going to happen is that your symbol there is going to get called on each element of your array. And then that's going to be the value that gets passed to it. Well, is there something that can do for us here to simplify this line? Well, yeah, there is actually, because if we look at hash, we see that hash has a toProc method. And what does it do? Well, hash toProc returns a proc which maps keys to values. So the proc that hash gives you, you can call it with a key and it will return the value. So what does that look like? Well, so if what we do is we call letter values here like this with our unary ampersand, that is going to give us a proc that looks something like this. Right? So it looks, and then that's going to get converted to the block by this. So it's going to get converted exactly to that. So it's just a slightly shorter way of doing this. Okay, what's going on here? Something is breaking. Wait a second. We don't need that. That was left over, sorry. Okay. So that works. So when I get to this point, in fact, let me go ahead and submit this real quick, and then I want to make another comment on it. As I see this and as I do this, the question I'm asking myself now, Ruby makes it very easy to be very concise and to be very clever. But the long-term value of this code rests largely in its grokkability. How hard is it to understand this code? How readable is this? Well, I don't know. I understand what this does. So to me, I can read this. I've got no problem understanding this. But it's a little bit more advanced Ruby than somebody that's less familiar with the language might see. I can remember being confused by these sorts of things. Now, of course, it drove me to look them up and to read about them and understand what was happening here. But if you don't understand what's going on here, it can be confusing. Well, thankfully for you, if you didn't understand it before this course, now you do understand it. So the question becomes, what's more readable? When I or some other developer comes back in 6 months without having all the context I have right now, is it going to be? Am I going to stub my toe trying to understand line 31, or is it going to be clearer to me or as clear as line 32? I mean, it's certainly fewer characters. That by itself is no great value. So I get a little bit torn here. This is where I ask myself, have I been too clever? And sometimes, in some cases, I will actually back away from what I've done because I realize, yeah, it's cool, it's clever, but it is not as clear as what was going on before. So you tell me, is this too clever or is this readable to you now that you understand what's going on here? Leave a comment. Let me know what you think. I'm going to go ahead and mark this solution as completed.